Hi.
Hi.
Well, nice to meet you again.
Finally.
Yeah, but I mean, I've met you. The people haven't met you.
Yes.
Who are you?
Who am I? Wow. What name am I using?
I
That's
know.
the
I was like,
question.
what name are you using? What references are we using?
Are we taking my government name
Yeah,
or my
are we
online
doing
name?
government?
I don't
Let's do
know.
government.
Oh, we want to do government.
I mean, it's up to you.
Sure.
This is about you.
Jodh Singh. That's
Okay.
it. That's what we go by.
Why are we so afraid of this?
Oh no, I don't know. It's funny because like there's a difference between like people when you know me in person versus like people who know me online.
Yeah.
I always say like if you
Two
go
different people.
Yeah, if you go by my Instagram handle, you don't know me.
No.
People be like, hey, so Jodh Singh, and I'm like, it's George, but nice to meet you.
You know what's fascinating is like when we first like started following each other, I actually was like, I'm almost certain that it's likely not your name.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to outwardly say it because I'm also like, I don't know people like that.
Yeah.
But I also was like, I think like, I mean, maybe I have some background on the culture. So I was like, maybe not. But it's really cool. But I also just love the fact that like you actually have this elusive side to you. That's like, all of
you gotta stay elusive. Keep people guessing, you know?
That's like 90% of like what I love to do with people.
Yeah.
But like in terms of what you're actually doing in the city, what are you up to? What have you been doing? What have you been engaging with lately? What's something that's exciting you right now?
You know, I'm on the west end of the city, which we always say west end, the best end.
Best end.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's a pretty fun and lively neighborhood.
Yeah.
Depending on who I'm with and what I'm feeling, it depends on what neighborhood I'm saying from. But Parkdale, I love Parkdale. It's a good area.
I like Parkdale too. I feel like there's a lot of like hidden elements to Parkdale which are genuinely really nice.
Yeah.
And I just love the vibe. It has this kind of like edginess to it that's a little bit different than what you're getting on this side of the city, maybe.
It gets a bad rep, but to be honest, I feel so safe there.
No, I've never felt unsafe there. I feel more unsafe like going to like Yonge and Dundas than to go to Parkdale. So I 100% feel you. But I also like recently I was like driving some of my friends to actually go get actually Indian food.
Yeah.
I really wanted, not specifically North Indian food.
Yeah.
And so we had gone north in the city. So we had actually gone towards basically like just near Don Mills. And I was like, this already feels sketchier than downtown.
Yeah.
But I also was surprised because I don't remember Don Mills ever being that way. So I feel like areas of the city are changing. It's constantly in flux. You know, so I feel you.
Yeah.
How long have you been in Toronto? What are your thoughts on the city so far?
Yeah, we're creeping up on what, 6 years now, which is wild to me. I didn't think I'd last this long, to be honest.
Why?
I don't know. I kind of came here on a 2-year visa just to like travel and explore.
Yeah.
I didn't travel or explore. I got stuck here. My mom's always like, oh, you said you were going to go traveling. I haven't even been to Quebec yet. I haven't been to Montreal. No, I haven't been anywhere yet. If anything, I've traveled more to the States than I have in Canada.
Yeah, but like, I mean, I'm 100% the same way. I've been here on and off for almost 13 years. And within that time, I know more of the US than I know of Canada. So, I mean, it's not just you.
Yeah.
It's also like, I mean, not to knock Canada, but to knock Canada. It's not the most engaging of places.
Yeah.
So it is what it is.
Yeah. But back to your question, you asked about like what have I been up to. I mean, there's been so many things going on. Like,
tell me.
I've been working on a project with my buddy Sick Knowledge. As you see, I usually post about
I always see it.
Yeah.
I really want you to talk about this because I don't think a lot of people know.
No.
And that's important for people to know.
It's on Sunday. I mean, if you want to come through.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've been working on that. It's mostly him. I mean, he's the DJ. He's the artist, right? Yeah. I'm just like the force behind it that works on the promotion and like
and the education.
Yeah, supporting the coordination behind things.
Yeah.
But together, you know, like we've been crafting this, and it's been growing and growing.
And it's like a community. Like, explain to people what it is.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, we were talking earlier about the like South Asian politics, right? And like I identify as a Punjabi, and we are, you know, like even when you were saying about Indian food, like South Asian culture like South Indian culture gets swallowed up by North Indian culture. Course. But even within that, like being North Indian and Punjabi specifically, there's a whole experience and intersection to that. And I think quite often Punjabi music is really consumed by Bollywood industry. there's things about our culture that likes to be hijacked, but we don't get to get the best representation in media either. They come for the drums and the music, but when it comes for our politics and identity, they're not there for it. We always characterize. I mean, you've seen lots of Bollywood films, right? Like the way Muslims are characterized in certain films, the way Punjabis are characterized. We're always either portrayed as the evil villain for most Muslim characters, or as Punjabi Sikh characters, like the bumbling idiot. That's like an oaf that isn't very intelligent and is always goofy. So like, I think this was very much a way to push against being consumed in this pan-Indianism that happens in the city. And so we were like Panjabi Folk Dub Sessions. So the intersection of that is like all Punjabi music from like the 1960s, 1950s, all folk music, traditional music, beautiful artists like Surinder Kaur or who else, like Reshma and there's so many different other artists that aren't coming to my head right now.
It's also like you're on the
they'll
spot.
They'll come to me as we're talking. But yeah, I mean, Surinder Kaur is an icon. And then there's Noor Jahan and all these other people that have like pulled up over the years. And, like for us, Punjab was like split as a country, right? So like you've got West and East Punjab, and, the revolution is to reunite those two pieces together because ironically I have a British accent and my people were the ones that split that land.
I feel like, so you know what, I think also this is a really good point for context, for people who maybe don't know, right? Because I think also even the idea of the partition and how the partition worked was responsible for the partition. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of visibility on that. I think even I can also acknowledge the fact that like I think maybe my family talked about it when we were younger, but I didn't necessarily take a lot of it, from them. And then the more I talked to like my relatives when I was older, I began to understand a little bit more about how it actually worked and how problematic it is. Do you want to kind of give people a primer on what the partition was?
I mean, like, first of all, you had Britain invading India, and like, how did you end up with so many South Asians that moved also as a part of that colonial project from India into places like Kenya and Uganda? Right, they were already shipped over there or to the Caribbean, and then on top of that, when India starts fighting for its independence and countries get split, people get displaced.
Of course,
they become refugees in different lands, and so they have to escape. It's like 1947, 1947, and like my family were in what is now Pakistan, Punjab, and they had to. I actually looked on the maps. It was 255 kilometers on foot by camels, carts. And they're doing this all while there's like chaos all around them, gun firing. People are like pillaging villages. Because either side of the tracks, the British created a religious divide. Right? They separated everyone upon lines. We actually had a conversation about this on Thursday with my friends. Like when the Brits came to India, how did they talk about South Asian people?
Right.
Like how did they call people from India? And they were all termed Hindu.
Right.
So whether you're a Muslim, Sikh, or
you all kind of like grouped into one.
You look at all the references and documents; they all say Hindu, and that. And then slowly it became Hindu and Mohammedan. So Mohammedans were the Muslims, and the Hindus and Sikhs were together. But the British had to create these like lines to understand like, how is it that a Muslim goes to a mandir, a gurdwara, and still goes to Sufi dargahs or goes to the mosque too? And so they had to create these divides, right? And so, religious tensions were inflamed.
But isn't that fascinating? Like one of the things that I think that like has always been fascinating is just that need to kind of categorize people in that way without genuinely acknowledging that these are actually not just culturally different groups of people. These are people who have occupied lands in very different ways, that have existed in very different ways. But now, simply because of your arrival and your need to sort of kind of make sense of this situation of what you're basically claiming, you have now kind of grouped everyone into one grouping. Right?
And so that narrative really builds for us the reasoning behind Panjabi Folk Dub Sessions. There's so many scars that exist in our families. So many stories of partition. Punjab is rocked by that story of partition on either side of that border.
I mean, even within Punjab itself, and the way that Punjab is divided,
yeah,
like after the fact that, you know, like that division itself also unnecessary in a sense that like when that did not exist in the way that it does now, right?
Exactly. And then, you know, post that, what happens to Punjab? The lands, even further lands get annexed. And so like what used to be this giant lung-shaped land is now like a tiny coin left of what it once was. And it was a powerful kingdom too.
It was. That's the fascinating part about it, right?
But, you know, and now the national language of Punjab isn't even Punjabi.
Right.
And, you know, like constantly from central government, they're trying to erase that, right? It's now becoming the second language rather than the main language.
Imagine Delhi being as small as it was, has now, that influence of what Delhi is, has kind of consumed that. Chittagong, as small as it was, also becoming a small annex that's not like slowly growing out into what it is. Right? So that's very like, that's really, really interesting to hear.
So then when this is why we get angry, because we're like, you like our food, you like our culture, you like our music, but you don't like when we speak our mother tongue, you don't like it when we ask for rights, you know, the basics of like water, and leave our school education system to us.
Or, I also think like they don't have an understanding of who you were as people. Right.
But I think, you know, capitalism also has a role to play in this too. Right.
So one of the things that fascinates me the most, and I think like this was my first introduction to kind of like Sikhism as a religion, was like when we were younger, because we talked a little bit about how like a lot of these populations were also sort of forced into Africa to kind of work on railroads, etc. There were a lot of Sikh people who I actually brought there. And there are a lot of Sikh mandirs that exist in Nairobi. And actually, interestingly enough, along the highways, along the routes between like Nairobi, Mombasa, which is another city that's there. And so when we were younger, every time we would take a road trip, our stop was always at the Sikh temple, where we would actually go in, and there was almost like it was like a traveler's stop. Like you would go in there, and it's like literally everyone, but everyone's eating at the temple together, and the temple would provide food for free. I think their only request was obviously like that you were kind of like donating something, but also you were getting an education, because at that point, like it became immediately fascinating that you're in this place that, like for example, for me, did not look like my mosque, and that here we are like eating a meal, but also now we're getting to learn, right? That was my first introduction to Sikhism. And then after that, when I made a lot of friends at school, that's kind of how I started going into more like, you know, Sikh-centric events like Vaisakhi and celebrating Vaisakhi with people. So that kind of was an introduction. But I feel like that even in its own sense, that learning is unique, because a lot of people don't have those experiences or that engagement with your community in that way.
And I think that's the driving factor behind like who I am and what I am, right? Like I stay constantly inspired by, you know, the founder of Sikhi, Guru Nanak. Guru Nanak was like such a rebel and a shit disturber. Like, they pushed against everything that existed at the time. You said look, go right. Guru Nanak's like, I'm going left. And prove me wrong.
But that's amazing though, right? Like I feel like even to have someone who is that, not just that inspirational, but also that provocative at that time, and so and still holding true to who they were and who and where they came from, that's really key.
Right? And so I mean, Panjabi Folk Dub Sessions, the idea is to heal both sides of Punjab together again. You know, undo the damage between Hindu, Sikh and Muslim communities, and you know, everyone can vibe out on culture, language, and sometimes food. Sometimes there's food there.
I was going to be like, is there an event that's actually taking place that doesn't involve food in some capacity? Because I was like, I don't think I've gone to like any of my friends' events where there's not food involved. But also one of the things that really fascinates me, and you know, as I watch kind of like a lot of the stuff that you do around it, is that music seems to be such an integral part of not just this event, but it's an integral part of who you are, and what you practice. And one of my fascinations with watching your story sometimes is you actually doing these sessions with the ghazals and actually like spending Sunday morning. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, it's funny because like as a queer person that does engage on the queer scene too, right? Like everyone's like, have you heard the new Beyonce track? I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, like no shade to Beyonce, love her, great. But they're like obsessed with Madonna, and I'm like,
it's different.
You know, like good. You know, like they all have their time and space. Artists are artists, man. They create powerful stuff. but I don't vibe out in English.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But I also feel like that's what was so exciting to me, right? Because I think a part of me just felt like here you are actually engaging with your culture at such depth.
Yeah.
And we live in a city and in a society where it's very easy to quickly forget who you are and just sort of like amalgamate into this kind of like cumulative whole that sort of follows these trends, right?
Yeah.
And then you lose so much of who you are as a person, your cultural identity, your cultural references, music, right?
Yeah.
So here you are when you were putting up stuff like, you actually like spending the Sunday morning actually like practicing your ghazals.
Yeah.
I was like, this is amazing. This is amazing.
I think, going back to English and then Punjabi or even Urdu or Hindi, no shade to those languages either. They all, no, I'm being for real. Like, as much as we stress importance on Punjabi, but like poetry is written in Punjabi, Farsi, Urdu and Hindi, right? And, these Indic languages, they require you to understand so many different depths of words, right? And so, I think there's so much, I don't know about you, because I know you understand many different languages too, right? Like, sometimes English doesn't always convey like the feeling, the essence, the power of a word, or an experience.
No, you're so right. Like, for me, English was not even my first language. I think we talked a little bit about this in the past, but because of the way that my grandmother was with me, Urdu was my first language growing up. In fact, it was the one thing I spoke the most frequently. Up until I started going to school, and I think even now, like, it's not that I don't engage with it. It's just that I don't have many opportunities to engage with it. But the understanding still remains, right? I think like if you've grown up on a language, it's that. But also there's a cultural depth to that language that I think for me doesn't exist. You're right, in English. It doesn't exist in the same way. There's also just this sense of home in a language, which I think is so important because I think sometimes even when I feel very disconnected from things, I think my native languages, Urdu and I also speak Swahili, like between that alone, I think that sort of grounds you in many ways. English, I feel like in many ways is my adopted language, and it's not something that I actually, it's more, I would say it's my more functional language. That's what that way. When you need to express certain things or you want to talk in a certain way, or even if you want to get elicit a reaction out of someone that you know personally that speaks these languages, you will speak in your native tongue.
There's so many beautiful words in Urdu, right?
100%. 100%.
They just don't always translate in English. And so sometimes when I'm experiencing things or thinking about something, I think more in Punjabi or in Hindi or in Urdu because I can feel a connection to that word and it invokes a different feeling than what English does for me. So all to say is that music is really important to me. And I think a part of this interest in music, I've been healing with this quite a bit. Since we were talking quite frankly as well, I don't really talk about my father a lot, but actually my creativity, a lot of my creativity and my passion for music and South Asian instruments comes from my dad.
Nice.
And I've been healing that relationship. He's out there, he's doing his thing, whatever, wherever he is. Not seen him in 15, 16 years.
Okay.
But I'm learning to grow and maybe have a bit more compassion for him as a person and come to appreciate who he is or some of his experiences despite our own differences.
100%. Because I think I would say it's very, very key, right? I think even culturally, very similarly, I had a very similar experience with my dad as well, where I don't think I necessarily related to him as a person maybe when I was younger, or even as time has gone on. I think we kind of really sort of drifted apart. But there are certain elements of me that still are him, right? And I think culturally, a lot of the times it's the ties that are there, even the way that we were, even the way that I am when it comes to certain things. Maybe when I'm asking for things, or even when I'm engaging with certain things, with clothing, for example. He loved clothing so much. Just that element of this is actually a manifestation of his influence on you. I think so. The same way, right? The music, all of that connects you, right? And that I think is, in a weird way, a new way of fashioning that relationship. I think in many ways it's easy to lose control of a relationship like that. But now when you realize these are the pieces that kind of made up what I liked about that relationship, you can reform it into something else, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the exciting part about I feel like getting older, but also just like understanding relationships.
Yeah, and I think I was, I shared about it the other day, but like catching yourself as you age as well, like the traits of your parents.
No, 100, like right? It blows my mind all the time. Like when I was younger, I would run away from being like my parents.
Yeah.
Now I'm just like the way that I am. Like we were even just a few minutes ago. Like they obviously would not know this, but like there was incense in the house. Yeah. This has come from how our house was when we were younger, right? Like this is what my mom would do, what my grandmother would do in the house, right? The way that I ask for things is 100% the way that like my family would ask for things, right? So you become like them more and more the older you get. And weirdly enough, there's a comfort in that. But I also think that like you are continuing that lineage.
It depends what trait you're bringing in, you know. Sometimes
that's why I'm so mindful of it, because I'm like, it doesn't have to be everything. But we can pick the pieces that we actually genuinely feel are of value. But I think also back to your point about, you know, music as well, is like you need to retain these things, because I don't think it'll be lost in a generation if you're not retaining it. So you choosing to actually become more like them and retaining that element of it, it's a sense of preservation. You're doing your own form of curation in this you know, future.
He actually was he was a musician, and I was thinking about this the other day, that, you know, like with our migration to England, there's a huge story there as well, just like there's a story of Kenya and Uganda and all these other different countries where people were shipped out to. But you know, there's a really iconic and unique experience for South Asians that moved to England in the early 50s, 60s, and 70s. And there was a whole music boom that happened in the 80s, and my father was actually a part of one of those music booms in the mid to late 80s. And so now there's this iconic Punjabi group called the DCS. They're like a staple of every wedding party. Like you always hear their music. But before DCS blew up, my dad was their tabla player for them.
Amazing.
But as I think about my father and like discipline, I struggle with discipline. And so I identify as like a jack of all trades, master of none, because I lack discipline. And I know that about myself. Like if I, you know, like I pick up instruments, but I wouldn't call myself an artist, never, because I don't have the discipline that it takes to be an artist or a professional in that.
I mean, music. You say that, but like, I mean, it could evolve, right?
It could evolve. Yeah.
Also, it's always, I don't know, I personally feel like it's better to be broad and know a little of everything than be so honed in on it.
Oh, absolutely.
Know? And for you to even talk about the fact that you do play tabla, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I've picked up bits over the years. So like I like instruments. My dad, the first instrument my dad bought me on our first trip to Punjab was a little dolki. It was about this big, double-sided drum. And that was my favorite thing to bang around. And then that progressed into me learning the dol, which is the bigger drum that you usually see at celebrations if you go like downtown, or usually festivities. And that's another thing, right? That links back to like Bollywood and this pan-Indianism. When they talk about like music and drums, what's the first thing you see? A dol. That's the first thing you see at a ceremony, because like that drum doesn't exist. It's a Punjabi instrument. And so it transformed onto the dol, and then from there, a lot of my experience as a Punjabi and as a Sikh has its roots in my identity as a Sikh, and like music is really integral to being a Sikh. You know, like I think when people think about queerness and faith, right, like their experiences come from an Abrahamic lens, or especially in Western worlds, like experiences of the Catholic Church or the Christian churches, right? That's their experience, and so people shudder when they think about faith. For me, mine's like all about art and poetry. Like I'm having a different time in comparison to how other people see faith.
100%.
And so, you know, like what I worship is built on poetry. Like the whole of the Guru Granth Sahib is composed in seasons and months, and those seasons and months of rags are based on like certain feelings. So, you know, there's like, I think there's 13 rags or 12 rags of that exist in the music pantheon, and our scripture is set to music, it's set to poetry, it's set in a very poetic way,
right?
And then it's sung, so it's sung in a certain rag, in a certain pitch and tone. It's beautiful. It really shoots you in the heart.
Yeah,
right. It's designed to evoke certain experiences, longing, passion, love, yearning, so many different things. So yeah, that like my journey with music has also been shaped by that too. So
of course,
learning the harmonium, which is a Anglo-Indian instrument, because when people came to, when colonizers came, everything was stringed, and to evolve things, they moved on to the piano, and so like the harmonium is like this in between version of a wind and a string, I guess a percussion instrument. It's like metal plates that vibrate by using a pump, and then you're using a piano scale.
I think for a lot of people, like it's the sound that a lot of people associate with Indian music, strangely, because it's the most distinct sound that they hear, and they're like, oh, it's this, and I'm like, yes, but there's an element of other things in here as well.
It's very, I would describe it like the accordion. Very much like that. But whatever you play on a vajja or a harmonium is the same keys and chords that you could play on a piano or a accordion.
I mean, it's a very difficult instrument to learn. I think I grew up on music parties a lot, with my parents taking me to these people's homes for music parties, where they would have a specialist in the harmonium who would come in, who would sing, and then they'd be singing rags actually a lot. But interestingly enough, they had a lot of there's a deliberate nature to those instruments that you don't hear anywhere else. Right? And so even just getting specialized in that way, understanding instruments in that way, made them kind of almost like mini celebrities of sorts, because they're the only ones who could do it. For the rest of us who are trying to learn, it's kind of just what are you even talking about? This doesn't come naturally to us.
So my passions in music are split. So it's a faith spiritual journey. Another one is just music, and another one is deep cut poetry. There was one I was listening to just recently, Iqbal Bano, and she has this beautiful rendition of the poet Ghalib, and it's so deep, and I always think if I'm going to listen to a ghazal, I better be in a different kind of mood. But also, don't listen to it if your mental health is on the edge. Don't listen to it, because it will just push you over the edge.
But I feel that's what it was. But I think to write even in that way, that you would not just be able to evoke some that feeling. People really I think a lot of people around me will read a lot of Western poetry with that same kind of. And kind of say that it's eliciting this kind of reaction, which maybe there are elements of this in there, but I don't actually think it's at that depth. The way that you will hear a ghazal sometimes, I don't think it's very, very. There's something about it. I think even sonically, and the way that it impacts you, in the way that it's changing your mood, right? It's a completely different mood, and I don't think they were creating music. There's a very different way of connecting that music and that poetry to emotion that is hard to explain to a Western audience. I don't think you can. The closest I think is when I think of people in for example in Turkey who are singing arabesque, and when you listen to arabesque music, it's the same. It's the sound that you will literally feel like I'm in the emotions so deep. So deep, and you're in this state just from 2-3 seconds of hearing something. That's what it does to you, right?
You almost leave your body. But I'm forgetting the line in Urdu that she's singing, but it's Ghalib's poetry, and Ghalib, he falls in love, and he's captured by this person's glance, and what he's saying in the poetry is that you murdered me with just your look, and that I fell at your door, but don't wrap my body in a shroud and place it at your doorstep, because I don't want anyone. I don't want my lowliness to bring such an ill repute to your house, and also for people to know that you were the one that caused this to me. So
I love that.
It's such a there's so much there's so much that goes into this whole one line, right? There's so much that goes into this one line of poetry that conveys like a paragraph of background depth of information.
But one question I have for you around this is this, and this could be connected to maybe your overall experience as a queer person that's also kind of like learning a lot about who you are as a Sikh person, is like, how do those two worlds sort of meld for you? Is there something that connects them? Is there something that you found? I mean, your event is, I feel like, a very queer positive space.
Yeah.
But beyond that, like, how are you sort of reconciling those two elements?
Oh, wow, that's a question. Yeah, I mean, like, PFDS, Panjabi Folk Dub Sessions, is queer-led.
Yeah.
And, it's not exclusively queer, though, I would say. The idea is...
Which I love, by the way.
But, like, throughout that process, they know they're getting a faggot for a DJ.
Yeah,
they know that they know that they're going to come and see, like, harnesses and girlies, like, sissying out on the floor. And they better respect that space.
They have
to. Throughout the night, and the bar stuff are great, too. The spot that we hosted at, La Piscina, shout out. We're constantly reaffirming, like, you better be checking in people's pronouns. You better tip the bar staff. And you better respect the space. Like, this is a queer space. So if you're visiting here, mind yourself. Like, we very much affirm that. And if anything ever pops up, we nip it in the bud straight away. And so the people that come through are really there for the art, the music, and the experience. And time after time, the room is packed.
I think it's very, very interesting to me because I feel like it is a way to even connect with some of these more like heteros in our lives, because they're coming to a space to appreciate the music. The music is not bound to a sexuality. I don't think the appreciation is not bound to a sexuality. There's just this unique sense of just like, we're coming here to just have a good time. I think it's so empowering in its own way. I also think the fact that like they can see queer people exist in their happiness and in their truest selves in a space like that. Well, I also kind of inadvertently sort of educate them, right, into the fact that the queer experience maybe is not what they thought it was, and it's a much happier experience that they believe it is. Which I really like. I like that a lot.
But back to your question about how I reconcile the two.
Bring them together.
Yo, that's a deep dive unpack. Because
you don't have to go like, obviously there are certain, like, whatever you're comfortable talking about. But we can talk about it a little bit. But like, I mean, for me personally, like, I can speak to the fact that, like, being Muslim and growing up Muslim and then understanding my queerness in the context of me being Muslim has maybe in some ways distanced me from some elements of my Muslim upbringing, which I'm very okay with. But also, I think it's enlightened some elements of my Muslim upbringing that I actually took for granted that I didn't necessarily see immediate value for. Right? And I think even now, just engaging with my community, what that engagement looks like, I think it's very personal to me. And so that's why I was curious, like, what does that sort of like look like for you?
Yeah, culturally, there's a lot of rampant homophobia in my community. Like scripturally, there isn't anything that there's no position or edict on any kind of that like on sexuality, because that's not the experience of a Sikh, right? Like the idea of being a Sikh is to open your soul, dig deep into your heart, and learn how to become one with humanity. Like it's becoming oneness.
Exactly.
Like it's not you and I, it's us, or like the one, like the oneness of existence. And so, in that, how can you start saying, well, actually, but gender's like this? Because we're going beyond gender. We're going beyond sexuality.
It has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, also just where Sikhism exists or where its origins are is in a country, in a people where gender had its own diversity already and had been recognized for centuries.
Yeah.
Right.
And so my journey with like my identity as a Sikh, I unfortunately ended up in orthodox isn't a term for us, but that's the closest I can describe it is like the most like orthodox practice of Sikhs. And so I grew up in a very sheltered way. So I part of me now that I'm 30 is like catching up on all this queer youth that was robbed of me. And I really do believe that when they say like queer folks are 10 years behind hetero peers, like absolutely, because we're playing catch up constantly.
You're technically going through, like, I think I remember reading in the book, it's almost like a second puberty.
Yeah.
Because you've almost sort of entered a new life, and you are now relearning certain things about yourself that you would have typically have learned maybe when you were going through.
And so in my community, my seat at the table was with the elders, the people that were making decisions. We would go out and preach to other people. And like I got to go to Germany. I got to go on different tours up and down the UK. Like we did different camps. But also my dress was different. I wore only traditional outfits that a Sikh wore. I wore arms and, you know, like a blue tunic that went down to here, big turban, lots of metalry in it. And then also my food, I didn't eat out. I couldn't eat in restaurants. I ate from only raw natural iron materials, and I wouldn't eat from other people that weren't like me.
Right.
So that became a very difficult practice, especially when you're in a non-practicing Sikh family.
Right.
Because my mom was like, what do you mean you're not going to eat from me now? Like, you're going to cook your own food. You're 15. Calm down.
Yeah.
And she's like, you know, whatever your God is.
Also,
like,
to deny a mom to cook a meal for her child.
Right. So that you can imagine that didn't go down well. But yeah, I mean, like slowly, you know, like as you start recognizing your queerness, you move away from that. And then that took its own journey. And then sadly, I was outed at the age of 20. But you know what? I think in hindsight, like it was probably the best thing that happened to me. I was actually going to come out. Someone beat me to it. I told them I would give me a week because I, you know, I was setting my life up, and I knew things could go tits up. Like, you know, there's always a chance of being thrown out onto the 100%. Street. I'd rather have a home first before I get thrown out, you know, somewhere to go. So I was put in an uncomfortable situation, and I had no choice but to tell someone who I was really close to. And unfortunately, they decided to beat me to it. They had no reasoning as to why they did that, but they stole that opportunity from me. And so, you know, that went really bad because my family were like, you are someone who has been well known in our community. You're the pride of our family, especially in the Sikh community. Like, you know, people would give so much accolade and respect to my mum because of my practice. You know, wherever she went, she was welcomed with the most warmth possible. And you know, for me to come now and take that away was quite hard for them. You know, like, and I think about you know, like why sometimes people have a difficulty understanding experiences of South Asian people or people from other racialized background is because in a Western society, you know, it's very individualistic, but we're grown up, we operate in a communal style, right? So it's not just what you're going through alone, it impacts everyone else.
100%.
Whereas like in an individualistic society, you know, that's your problem.
And that's the thing.
It doesn't exist. It doesn't go beyond you and mom and dad.
No.
Maybe.
Which I also think is like very fascinating that you say that, because I think also even when people would have heard your story, I think if they'd come from a more Western perspective, it would just be like, oh, it's easy to just like leave and kind of like figure it out on your own. But they don't understand that at the end of the day, like you are not just an individual. You exist as a cumulative whole. And you uprooting yourself in that way throws dynamics in other people's lives that are as detrimental, like kind of how they
and it doesn't matter how much I say, well, can I swear? Fuck that, leave, run, you know? It's none of their business, you know? You do you, and that's great. But I can't do me knowing that my community operates in a community. Therefore, I can't travel places or be certain places or areas because I will get harassed or I wouldn't be left alone. And so I knew, you know, I was outed at 20 and I moved to Canada at 25. I got my degree, got my shit together. And my mom was always having a hard time with my queerness. Now she's coming to Pride this year.
There you go.
And you know, like last year I took her on Church Street and she was saying all these like problematic things. I was like, Mom, you can't say that. This is Canada. We operate a little differently. But you know, she had a great time. She made besties.
She at least came out.
Listen, she's got a drag queen following her on Instagram. Like she's having a great time.
No, there you go.
But you know, like now my family are great. But you know, distance, time,
that's everything.
It is everything. And I think now they've just come to love me for me. And you know, like now my mom's harassing me about when am I getting married and having kids, and just because you're gay doesn't mean I'm going to leave these things.
No, because I feel like that, and they have that mental checklist where they're supposed to be like, these are the successes that our child did all these things.
Yeah.
Is that element doesn't change.
No.
But I also feel like, what interesting is that you've said that it is a matter of time. I also think like it's also, you've been able to sort of connect with her differently now, right? Like I think that because she's been a part of this journey with you, you both understand each other in a very different way.
Yeah, right? And my mom's a young parent. She's a single parent, and she's had some real like crappy things happen to her in life. But I think as you age with your parents, like you realize, especially a lot of South Asian parents who had to have kids young. My mom had my brother when she was 19 and me at like 26. I'm 30. I couldn't have 2 children at this point.
Can you imagine like raising 2 children?
Yeah.
No.
My mom's age, right? If I was my mom's age now, I'd have a 4 or 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. No. I'm not trying to raise those. So like, my mom, I grew up with my mom. My mom grew up with us. So now we're more like friends, And so I have a lot of compassion for her experience, but also we've moved away from like mother-child because I'm independent. I'm an adult now, so now we can just focus on being, blood relatives, but also we're good friends now.
But also, she's educating you. I mean, right now when I watch you cook, I'm almost certain that everything that comes from your cooking comes from her.
Parts of that from her, but like I said, I had to learn how to cook young, right? Like my passions in cooking come from that experience of having to make my own food at 15 and 14. But my family have they've gotten so much better with that experience. But having to move here, I finished my degree and my mom was like, you want to be gay, go do it on someone else's doorstep.
Right.
And now she's like, come back home.
Come back home.
But
because in their mind, it's like, it seems so irrational in the moment.
Yeah.
It seems so unfathomable that I have to like now do the mental work to understand this or to understand my child, or that I think also a part of it, like I was reading in another book, that there's a sense of grief for them in a sense that like they thought they knew who their child was.
Exactly.
Now you're kind of telling them, wait, no, that's it's like, it's just dead. That's the old me.
Yeah.
This is who I am. But this is who you've always been.
Yeah.
Right? So they have to almost like relearn that. And so that is such an impact on them. And then then eventually they realize, wait, I genuinely do love my child and I actually want to actually be a part of their lives.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, now come back.
Yeah, and I've got some great allies in my family. My mom's sister, my aunt, was my first ally.
Yeah. It's always an aunt.
Yeah.
It's always an aunt.
Listen, but she can't say anything now because her daughter's now a lesbian.
There you go.
I paved the path for the other cousins to come out.
Yeah, you went through the hardship. You should remind them of this.
Yeah.
And just be like, just so you know.
Yeah.
Residuals.
Yeah, so when my aunt went through it, my mom was looking at her like, it's different, isn't it, when it's your own kid?
Yeah. Because you know what, also at the same time, when there's that element of like, it's like there's a little bit of a distance.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
But I also think like, it's interesting how different people in your family will resonate with you very differently when it comes to your experience. And even though maybe you were raised by your mom or, you're like that, whoever is your immediate family, I think your extended family or people around you can actually reform and become more pivotal parts of who you would consider family.
Yeah. But going back to like how identity and like queerness and being a Sikh has shaped and transformed, like leaving home was really important. And during that period, like graduating, leaving home, I had my first real solid relationship with my boyfriend had ended. Actually, my mom was really good about that. Like she was really there for me, and she wanted to meet him. But I think on the cusp of me being like a year and you can meet him, we like broke up. And so that was a really traumatic experience, that relationship. And so I think leaving England at that time was a great time to just like come here and explore who I was. This city has really, I've got a lot of love for this city. I don't know where I'm feeling about it now, but I will always say this city was a gold mine for so many different reasons.
I think in many ways you're right. Like it feels very formative for you to have been here, that you kind of like really understood who you are a lot better. Have you found that since you've been here, that you're not just, I mean, obviously a lot of you has changed, but do you still feel like there are elements of you that are still very true to who you were when you first came here?
Absolutely. There's so many different things that so many things that haven't changed about who I am as a person. I think emotionally, mental health wise, you know, like my emotional intelligence, that's all changed. I'm such a different person in that aspect. But in terms of how I live, my moral compass, those kind of things, I don't think any of those things have really changed for me. Maybe they've grown and evolved into more beautiful things, but they've not, at the core of what they are, they've not necessarily changed, you know.
Which is good.
And then, like, you know, I haven't really given up many of my spiritual practices either. Those they've evolved a little bit, but they've not changed, and that comes with decolonizing my practice. Unlearning all the harm that's happened to my people. I love history. I love history. I love researching history because I think it really gives us an insight into the truth of who people were.
100%.
Like we can say what people were like yesterday, but until we actually start reading these books and accounts and looking at cross references of what's actually happening, until you actually really get a painting of what's happening on the ground and what's happening with people. And so, you know, that's really healed my journey as a queer person with my faith or spiritual practice by looking back at history and trying to understand that things aren't always so black and white. We went from here and now we're here and this is how it is. No, it's got a whole journey and a story and an experience, and you can't erase that.
No, 100%. And you're very right. Like, I also feel like you almost have to reassess your understanding a lot about what it is your upbringing is. I also think like being in a North American perspective really changes how you were seeing your culture. When you look at your culture again, you actually realize just how problematic it has been because of what has happened as a result of these North American influences, right? Like I always attribute the fact that like I always looked down on maybe elements of what it meant to, for example, be Kenyan, because I was like, oh, this seems uncivilized. But I was like, uncivilized under whose perspective? And I was like, under my trained British colonial perspective or my perspective as a Kenyan? Because if I was thinking about this as my history as a Kenyan and what has happened to our country, then there's nothing uncivilized about this. No. Like this is just the way that we were, right? And this is us being true to ourselves, right? So I think that kind of reformation is very, very necessary.
Yeah. And so with my journey as well, like I think jumping England, coming here, a lot of my true to like the practice of Guru Nanak being like, fuck you, and I'm going to show you a different path, and this is the better way. And rebelling, you know, like I think even, you know, like how can you raise, and I argue about this with my community all the time, how are you going to raise people to be sovereign, independent people, and, you know, that each person individually is their own king or queen, or however they want to identify with that label of royalty. You know, whatever the idea of that is, that you are your own person and you aren't dictated to. How are you going to raise a group of rebels but then say, actually, you need to practice this way, conform, right? Like you need to conform. You're a rebel, but conform. No, I'm going to be a rebel in the most moralistic
as
way.
You should be. I feel like that's the only way to be. I don't think there needs to be like, no, you should always be breaking the mold.
Rebel with a cause. And so, you know, like there wasn't anything for queer people, queer Sikhs. I remember, you know, like I feel really old when I say this, but like when you go
30, I don't think that's even remotely old.
It isn't. But when you think about like you know, all the great sites that used to exist, like Craigslist and
back in the day.
That's what I'm saying. Back in the day. So like, you know, whenever you try to search up like gay Sikhs, there was one website called Sarbat, and it was like one of those blog forums, discussion boards. So like it was those crappy little files that you had to click into to get to a discussion like board where people would talk. There was no instant messaging. There was none of this. It was all public conversations, right? Like back and forth. And so that's all that existed at the time. And for the longest time, that's still there, I think. But, you know, like 2017 comes around, 2018 comes around, and I'm like, I can't keep doing this. Like, I'm figuring out who I am. I keep being told that I can't practice as a Sikh and still be queer. I'm like shunned by a lot of the people in my community. My family are having a hard time with my queerness and my identity as a Sikh, because they're like, well, you can't still be a practicing Sikh and a queer person at the same time. And I'm like, well, let me show you.
Yeah.
So, you know, like there's always arguments and conflict around that. I was having my own identity crisis. So like at one point I did end up cutting my hair, and because I didn't feel welcome in this space anymore. And I was having this huge crisis of like, well, if they're not going to accept me, then what am I doing here? Why am I beating a dead cow with a stick? And, you know, like I had to just reinvent that and be like, no, this isn't, what I'm seeing around me is hypocrisy and is not okay. And this is not what we stand for. What I'm experiencing is not what we are supposed to be as Sikh. So, you know, I decided that it was my time to like carve away. And, you know, I used my best judgment with my own experience, because I could see there were people in my own community that were coming out to me, right? Like, there's a bunch of them that still exist, and whose DMs are they?
A whole forum relating to this, so there must be more than one person.
Yeah, because the forum was like non-practicing Sikhs who mostly have an identity crisis. When I do my work, I do it from the perspective of the community of like that Orthodox community that I came from. Everything I do is for the people that are still trapped or stuck in that space, who are still trying to figure things out. And I'm seeing a shift in those spaces. It's slowly happening, but there are still people that are in my DMs like, I feel like this, you know, I'm practicing this way. What am I supposed to do? And there's no one there to guide them or give them advice or like, what is the process? You know, I was the one that they all saw like leave home, leave the community. I'm the one that they're seeing that has like dug into literature and research and connect the dots for them. So now my DMs are always full with questions about how to do things, or you know, what do you do in this instance? But like, you know, like because Sikhs wear you know, they're 5Ks, right? Like there's the kirpan, there's the kanga, which is the comb, the shorts, you know, these are all things, or the kara, these are things that you're not supposed to take off your body. You know, when you become initiated as a Khalsa, these are things that you commit to never removing from your body. You know, obviously you shower, you can like change things around. So the questions are like, well, I want to have gay sex. I've got a kashera on, or I'm wearing my kirpan.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, like to me, it's a no-brainer. I have my own thoughts and feelings, but when you are someone who feels committed to wearing your kirpan, you know, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know, where does that go when you're trying to hook up with a guy in the backseat of a car?
I mean,
or when you're going cruising,
it could be its own thing,
you know,
its own vibe.
I mean, like, but what do you do? Where does that go? And then these guys are dealing with like internalized shame,
of course,
and guilt, and you know, they're going through their own crises, right? So they come and slide in my DMs with all these questions of what do I do? And I'm like, first of all, I'm not going to give you an answer. I'm going to give you my experience, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. Because I don't want anyone to ever say you've been prescriptive to do this. You want to see what I'm doing and how it works for me, fine. And I will guide, but I'm not going to prescribe a way. No.
Since you've been so prescriptive, I'm kidding.
Liability, you know?
Liability. Since you've been really good at giving advice, what's one piece of advice you'd like to give everyone that's out there? Maybe not necessarily, you know, it could be any audience member. It could be someone even like if you're talking to people who maybe are still trapped in the closet and Sikh. But what's one piece of advice you'd want to give people?
Lead with love. There's not enough love in our community. Even this weekend, you know, we were out in the village, and like you can see sometimes people are in vulnerable states when they're, you know, using substances or drinking. Just like lead with love, man. If someone's in the washroom throwing up, go grab them some water. You know?
I mean, sometimes people forget that, you know, it doesn't, like, you don't always have to be an asshole.
No.
I also feel like we really go with that mentality out into the world.
We're a real traumatized community, and I get it. We're just like, lead with a little love.
No, that's really powerful. And I feel like that's a really good way to sort of literally lead your life. Like I 100% feel that way. I think everything changes around that. But thank you so much for doing this, Jodh. I had so much fun doing this. I honestly feel like we have to do more because I feel like there's so much more depth to who you are. There's so much more depth to what you're doing. So next time we'll do something a little bit different. But this was exciting. I really loved this.
No, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming by.
Yay.